Hey, um, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Career Week that's led by the Alumni Association. My name is Ihao, and I am the Program Director of Career and Professional Development, and along with my colleagues who will introduce themselves in a bit, we all work in the graduate school. We're very excited for you to join us in the session that's entitled Operation Introvert, Building Career Connections with Confidence. And then we have this week over 25 programs that's taking place, and there's a lot of actually networking opportunities for you as well. So we'll hope you will take some of the things that we will talk about today and apply in some real life scenarios. Like we were discussing earlier, this session will be recorded. By participating, you acknowledge and consent to your image, likeness, and or voice being recorded. For those of you who plan to use closed captioning, please click the CC button on the bottom of your Zoom panel. And we'll also take questions at the end of the webinar, and feel free to submit any questions using the chat function, also located at the bottom of the Zoom panel. So before we
Just quickly, you got a little quiet once you started recording. I don't know why, but
okay. Is it better now?
nope,
Or oh, I'm not sure what's the reason.
that's better. The last
Okay.
there you go. That
Okay.
works.
All right. Okay, then Linda, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself before we transition to the next slide.
Great, thank you, So I'm Linda McCree. I am a proud Maryland PhD alum. I won't tell you what year, and also the current director of the Center for Writing and Oral Communication, which is the graduate school writing center. So we support all the writing and oral communication work that our fabulous master's and doctoral students do on campus. And I'll turn it over to Simone.
Hi everyone, my name is Simone Ward-Bell. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I work as the graduate academic counselor for the graduate school. I support mental health and well-being initiatives through the graduate school as well as the campus at large.
Thank you, Linda and Simone. And please let me know if my voice goes away again. So for us to kind of introduce ourselves to you and also to ease into the question, we thought that a lot of us also have stories about ourselves and how we navigate a lot of like our social interactions as introverts or as people who may have anxiety. So we'll go ahead and share some of the stories just to normalize this topic that we're talking about. We'll go the reverse order. Simone, you can go first, and then Linda and myself.
Okay. Hi everyone again. So I want to definitely say I identify as being an introvert. I can definitely put on the face sometimes to talk to folks, and I've had people say, "What? You're an introvert?" and they don't believe me. I also identify with having anxiety, and I think of it as a companion, whether I want it there or not. It's a part of me, and I think, professionally, I've always been very clear about this. In a previous role, my then supervisor, who was a former director of the counseling center, said, as an introvert, you seem to put a lot of effort into filling people out before you connect with them or you trust them. And she really kind of enjoyed that quality of mine in terms of serving on interview panels, serving on search committees, because essentially it's like you're not just taking a person just at, how good they look or how polished they seem. A lot of things that can be attractive about potential candidates is like you're really kind of paying attention to who they are, what they're wearing, and the person as a whole. And I was always applauded and saying, I think you have really good judgment on some of the candidates that we're hiring and we're bringing here for interviews. And I was very fortunate. A lot of people that we did hire turned out to be really great, and we received really great feedback. And I was always praised for kind of the feedback that I gave on search committees. So that is one story I did want to share with folks. And then I'm going to hand it to Linda.
Great, thanks, Simone. So I have to admit, I'm not sure, after decades of thinking about this word, if I really am an introvert or not. But I do know that certainly all through my childhood, I was labeled as shy. Maybe that's the old-fashioned word for introvert. And I definitely greatly prefer situations where I know people that are going to be at an event, and or that I have a very clear reason to talk to people. So I find it really challenging to just kind of come up with small talk. I have a sister-in-law who's an actress, and we can literally walk into any place and she can strike up a conversation with anyone, and I try to like figure out how she does it, and I've decided it's genetic. And she ironically will say that she in fact would call herself an introvert, which always makes me laugh. But also I'll tell a story about the last conference actually that I went to, where I did kind of work through this kind of reluctance to talk to people. I was at a Council of Graduate Schools conference, which is largely attended by deans and associate deans, and I'm not a dean or an associate dean, so I already felt a little bit out of place. It's a relatively small conference, and a conference that happens regularly, and so lots of folks clearly did know each other. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go to the happy hour, whatever event, and try to talk to people. And I walked in with someone who I had been, or kind of at the same time, not with, but at the same time as someone I had been sitting next to at a session, and we had conversed. I think it had been kind of the session itself had asked for some engagement. And so she and I had been talking. And so we walked in and we're talking and got online together. And long story short, it was a really crowded, really noisy room. And we spent the whole time that we were there, just she and I talking. She was in a very different position than me, different field. She was an associate dean. And when we were done, I kind of felt, or, after we'd been there about like 45 minutes talking, and conversation had been very fluid. And she talked about her institution. I talked about my institution. I said, well, I'm sorry. I feel like I manipulated your time, or the whole time we were there. And she's like, oh no, that was just fine. Clearly kind of communicating that she too was perfectly happy to just have one engaged conversation rather than kind of flit around with other people. So there's my story, maybe of introversion, maybe not. And I'll turn it back to E.
Okay, so I share a lot of the sentiments that you already both shared. For me, as someone who's like a first-generation immigrant in this country, so English is not my first language. So when I came first to this country as a PhD student, going to conferences was very difficult. And I had a really interesting engagement. No one talked to me about how to show up at a conference, and I certainly I think got a little too excited when I saw someone recognize their name tag as someone that who I really admire their work, and I didn't think twice. And I don't know, I'm introverted as well, and I think I do feel anxious about approaching people, but I think I was just like too excited that I recognized somebody whose work that I've been citing. I walk up to them and then said, "Oh, Dr. Ren, and this is I so love your work." And then they kind of look at me and then went like, thank you. And then clearly there was something that was not connecting. And for me in that moment, I was like, oh my goodness, what do I say? How do I continue to engage? How do I exit from that conversation? And so there were a lot of things in my head that were playing out. And over time, of course, I got more practice meeting like other kind of renowned people in the field and researchers and scholars. But that interaction always like is kind of in my mind when I feel like, when we're here talking about networking, that a lot of times that we use this word kind of very freely, and everywhere we talk about the importance of networking, but really networking is a skill that anyone can develop and take some practice. So with that, I'm gonna kind of take us back to the intention of this session. And also for those of you who may have been paying attention to this topic, you know that Dr. Susan King, about maybe 10 years ago, has published this great book that is entitled Quiet, the Power of Introverts in a World That Cannot Stop Talking. In fact, at least 1/3 of people who we know kind of identify as introverts. They're the ones who prefer listening to speaking, who innovate and create, but dislike self-promotion, who favor working on their own over working in teams. So chances are a lot of you who choose to come to the session probably identify with some of these things that you're seeing on the screen. And then before we go further into the topic, we also like to remind everybody, right? I think a lot of times from our stories and from our experiences working with other people, we know that introverts can feel undervalued in the workplaces, especially a lot of times being an extrovert or being outspoken, being very social seem to bring a lot of benefits in the workplace. And in fact, there's actually immense power, as Simone has already talked about being introverted. And in the session, we'll continue to kind of give you some strategies and tips, and also based on research. So first, we'll review some methods to challenge some anxious thoughts that you might have about networking as an introverted person or anxious person. And then Linda will talk a little bit about networking from a communication perspective. And then I'll talk a little bit about how do you develop skills through kind of networking in the sense of career and professional development. And some quick reminders, right? This is not a group therapy session. We have a licensed therapist here with us as a presenter. So she will talk a lot about some of the clinical practices that you may be able to rely on. And also, please only share what you feel comfortable sharing, and we cannot guarantee confidentiality since we're recording this session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Simone.
Okay, so we're going to talk about understanding discomfort while engaging in networking. And this is kind of thinking about the things that kind of make networking a little bit hard and how to deal with them in a helpful way that feels realistic for you. So first off, I do want to talk about anxiety, introversion, and imposter syndrome. So essentially the definitions. Anxiety is usually characterized by nervousness, sweating, you may feel warm, have an intense heartbeat, negative thoughts. Sometimes it's tied to other mental health issues such as depression, general anxiety disorder, social anxiety, as well as sometimes other mood disorders. This can apply to phobias as well, but basically anxiety is kind of like you feel immensely uncomfortable. This is beyond the normal uncomfortable. Some people may have panic attacks or feel like their whole body is vibrating when they're kind of in this state of being anxious. Introversion is more of a personality component. You may feel uncomfortable with small talk or be exhausted by small talk. You may sometimes find people to be draining, and you may prefer to work in smaller groups, one-on-one, but the idea of having a big group and having to manage a lot of people, a lot of personalities seems very daunting to you. Imposter syndrome is a result kind of society. Usually this is the feeling that you don't belong, or you kind of feel like you're a fraud or a phony, or sometimes I talk to people and they're like, oh, I don't know how I got here. It must have been luck. There's a misattribution to your success, essentially. That would be considered imposter syndrome. And these three things have one big thing in common, and I have an image that kind of highlights it. They can all make networking really uncomfortable. You're going to have some discomfort while you're networking. I kind of put down some general thoughts that I've heard from people. Anxious, I'm nervous, I'm sweating, my thoughts are racing, and this is a lot to deal with. So you're talking to a lot of people. The more you talk, the more you're sweating. You're kind of like, am I sweating through my clothes? My hands are shaking. My hands so clammy. My hands are wet. My face is sweating. It's starting to rev up. Introversion, you may feel like, ugh, I don't want to have small talk with people. I don't want to talk about the weather. Whenever someone mentions the weather to me, I'm like, it's cold. Okay? That's all I have to say. I don't enjoy talking about, oh, the weather patterns or, things like that. I'm like, cool, it's cold. And indifference, the imposter syndrome is like you walk into a room and you think, these people are going to look at me and think, how did I get here? They're going to look at me and think, this person's a phony. Um, all these things are real things. They're experienced by a lot of people. I've worked with a lot of clients. I've heard these things from a lot of graduate students. The only one that can be diagnosed by a medical provider or a mental health clinician is anxiety. Introversion can be a trait that impacts anxiety. But you can take different tests like the Myers-Briggs, which can speak to your personality, or the strong interest inventory. Imposter syndrome is often highlighted by groups that are marginalized. So 50, 60 years ago, we were in certain spaces, environments that did not look the same. And some of that has played into different things currently, but essentially some spaces were primarily men, some spaces were primarily women, some spaces were void of people of color, Black people, LGBTQ people, or people with different abilities. And if you feel like you don't belong, you do, but if you kind of get that feeling, that is a part of imposter syndrome. So how do we deal with this? So, well, before we deal with this, let's talk about why anxiety might make networking difficult. Anxiety can create physical discomfort at times. So this could impact your stomach. This could impact how you're presenting to people. I know with pre-pandemic, a lot of people were shaking hands. And I remember when I would be at networking events, people would say, "Oh my God, that person's hand was so wet." If their hands were clammy or sweaty, but basically anxiety can impact that ability. I've been with people before in networking events where they're sweating profusely and they have to wear certain clothing to kind of try to counter that or take certain measures, but it can make you feel uncomfortable. You may not feel as confident in your speech or your abilities or be able to recall kind of what you want to focus on. This can also generate negative thoughts. So basically thinking, wow, I'm a failure, I'm not as confident, do I really deserve these type of jobs? Or I'm just here, no one's gonna hire me, no one's gonna want to connect with me. You may feel self-conscious about your appearance. So thinking, okay, my makeup isn't great, I don't have a good haircut, the suit looks outdated. Oh, they're gonna notice I have on white socks versus black socks. You'll just basically start picking yourself apart. Um, Virtual versus in-person can also feel different. Virtual, you can lose connection. It could freeze, which could then make you feel more anxious about them judging you over your internet connection. In person, you're more vulnerable in that they can see your whole self, where they can look at your whole body. They can say, "Oh, this person fidgets." They can notice things, but it can feel definitely different. Some people prefer virtual over in person, and some people prefer in person over virtual. But the idea is that anxiety can make one of them feel worse depending on your own comfort, your own presentation, and how you exhibit potentially anxious little telltales. So how do we deal with them? So these are some good tips. These are general because I think they're a good place to start, but this is not an exhaustive list. First, research the companies and organizations that you are, want to connect with or that are going to be at some of these events. You want to consider a company that aligns with your professional goals. Whenever I've talked to people and I said, well, why do you want to work here? If a person just speaks to the location, or if they speak to like, oh, I know you all pay a lot of money, that's never going to be a good thing. When I've talked to people about like, why do you want to come to Maryland? Their thing is like, oh, Maryland's committed to innovation. Maryland's committed to really working with different people. They're committed to kind of like campus advancement in this area, all these cool things. They're not going to say, oh, I would love to work at Maryland because it's close to DC, but not quite DC. And it's a little bit cheaper than living in DC. That shouldn't be the only thing. It's a real thing in practicality, but you want to make sure that you're looking at companies' mission statements. You want to make sure you're looking at what they stand for essentially, and does it align with you? Breathing in meditation is brilliant. There's a great meditation called the RAIN method. This is really great for people if you struggle with anxious thoughts, if you struggle with like, catastrophizing, thinking, I'm going to go into an event and I'm going to stutter and then my hand's going to hit someone in the face and then they're going to fall over a table and then the fire alarm's going to go off and I'm going to be arrested. If you're the type of person who escalates really quickly, you want to take a moment to breathe and meditate. Even if it's just doing 3 or 4 breaths, it can help bring you down. It can help recenter your thoughts. It can help your body calm down so you're not sweating as much. and it can also help with slowing your speech. So just taking a moment to that's all it takes. Doing 3 to 4 of those, it'll definitely change how you feel while you're talking, while you're engaging, and it'll change your thoughts. We have to challenge our negative thoughts. If you find yourself telling yourself, oh my God, I am probably the worst person here, I want you to ask yourself, what evidence do you have that supports that? Have you met everyone in the room? Do you have proof that they've all done something terrible? Do you have proof that they've all been amazing? We have to kind of lean into what we know and what we don't know. We have to kind of question kind of the things we're assuming. Sometimes we're assuming stuff, sometimes we're guessing stuff, like, oh, that person, they must have it all together. They have on like the suit that I wanted. They have on this, you'll fall into a place of comparison. Instead of doing that, saying, you could say, I like their outfit, but I don't know anything about them. If you're networking and maybe you didn't pick out the perfect outfit, maybe you have white socks instead of black or gray socks, and your suit looks good, but you have on some Hanes socks and you're nervous about it. They're like, oh, they're going to see my socks. How would they see your socks? How do you know they noticed your socks? I went on an interview once and I had on white socks because it was laundry day and I was in graduate school. And I remember I got the job and I was like, oh, I'm so nervous because I thought you were going to notice my socks. And the person said, I didn't even look at your socks. So we assume stuff, we can put stuff in our mind sometimes that's not really there. We have to challenge that. When I work with clients, I always tell them, I want you to focus on the things that are concrete, not the things that you're worrying about, not the things that you think may happen. I want you to focus on the things that have actually been said, not the things that are eating away the assumptions. I want you to focus on the things that have been said. If someone says, how are you? They have not said anything about how you look. They have not said anything about your abilities. They've only asked you a question. So we have to challenge the negative thoughts. There's different processes to do that. And I can talk a little bit more about taking, some resources forward later. You want to prepare and practice. If you are a person who struggles with networking, you're kind of like, well, how do I start? Do I walk up to a person and say, I need a job, I have student loans? What do you want to say? There's a great acronym that talks about family, occupation, recreation, dreams. So where is your family from? Or, where do you call home? Is Maryland home for you? What do you love about your job? What's your most favorite memory about your job? When you're not working, what do you do for fun? I love going out to eat. What do you like to do? Or right now we're in football season. Do you care about football? Or how do you feel about the football? Dreams. What's your dream vacation? If you had 2 weeks off, where would you go anywhere in the world? Or, if you won the lottery, what's the first 3 things you would do? These seem like simple questions, but it's a good starting point to kind of connect with folks outside of, how do you feel about the weather? Because everyone knows the weather, it's cold and we're all miserable. But this is a good place, asking where your family is from. If you feel potentially cautious about saying, well, where are you really from? Because sometimes that can feel microaggressive for folks. You can ask someone, where do you call home? Essentially, that feels more personable and it feels like, oh, I can talk about where I'm from. They can talk about where they're from or what feels like home for them. And maybe that may align with like, oh, you're from Chicago, me too, and you may have some things you can talk about and you may say, yeah, you're based here. That's kind of why I'm interested in applying. I saw you all had a good base in Chicago and you all have kind of done a lot for the Midwest as well as the West Coast. And I think I want to align with that. And it kind of gives you a good segue to talking about yourself while also engaging with them. Other ways to manage anxiety, wear something you love. Oftentimes, we're in suits, we're in dressed up clothes, we're in, professional attire that might not be comfortable. Wear something you love, wear something that makes you feel comfortable. Whenever I have been on a professional interview, I've always worn jewelry that has a memory. When I interviewed at College Park, I wore a necklace that I bought on spring break while studying abroad. Me and my mom bought it. It's a funny memory, but when I touched it, it made me feel at ease. I'll wear something that feels great. Something that might remind you of something that might bring you a piece of calm or things like that. If you're doing a virtual interview, maybe have something near you that can help anchor you and remind you, you can do this, you got it. I have a home office, and always near my computer, I have a sign that says I'm kind of a big deal. This is a gift from my mother because I'm always like, yeah, I think I do okay stuff. She's like, you're a big deal. Um, you know, you can really kind of help pour in this and kind of set up some support for you. These are just some general tips, a little bit more in terms of resources if you want to expand. Before I get into that, I'm remembering them out of order. But the other piece of this is, when you do the networking, if you are an introvert, if you have imposter syndrome, if you have anxiety, you may feel exhausted after you do this. And one thing that might help you kind of anchor yourself or motivate you to get through it is thinking about your self-care post networking. Acknowledge your emotions. So if you feel overwhelmed, if you feel tired, it's okay to just be kind to yourself, engage in a physical activity, take a break from social media, take a nap, engage in a mindful practice like coloring or journaling, engage in some hobbies, and connect with your friends, connect with your family, connect with people that are going to give you a boost. After the last day of classes, I put on an adult Snuggie and I watched terrible television. That is my reward for finishing the semester strong. So these are just some general tips on networking. And then if you want to do a deeper dive in terms of self-care, there are ample resources such as videos, apps, self-help resources, books, all these great things. Interpersonal support, use your friends, use your community, go to support groups. If you want to get mental health support, if you want to talk to a therapist or medication, or go to group counseling, there are resources, and I'm always happy to connect with folks to talk about that. And I think, Linda, you're up next, right?
Thanks, Simone. And please do feel free to keep putting comments in the chat and things. And we, as you mentioned before, we'll take questions later. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit as the communications person and talk about networking from a communication perspective. So in all sorts of things, right? We want to set goals, right? We know that setting goals, are actually articulating and planning for them makes reaching them more likely. And setting some communication goals for networking, especially in situations where it doesn't come naturally, it's not necessarily what you want to be doing, etc., is a good way to start to plan and address and therefore succeed at whatever the situation is. So we could think of the possible communication goals in a networking situation. I've kind of generalized them to two things, right? Is our goal saying something, right? We want people to hear us, and often in job situations, right, we want to be sure that we're communicating something about ourselves. Or is it learning something, right, and kind of hearing? So I kind of juxtapose those as being heard versus hearing. And of course, it doesn't have to be a binary that it's one or the other, but we can definitely think about not just, okay, I need to talk, but also I need to make sure that I'm hearing things. And maybe it's one of them before the other, right? I want to learn something and then I want to build on that. Or maybe it is really, I want to make sure that I'm communicating something about myself. And again, certainly in job situations, that's really important. But thinking about, okay, well, what do I want to make sure I'm being heard about? What do I want to hear? So kind of taking some time before the situation to actually plan for one of those. And then I'm going to dig into these a little bit more on the next slide. So if we think about what would some possibilities about saying something be, right? Does anybody want to offer some suggestions, either turning on your mic or just putting something in the chat? What are some examples? I have a few, right? Sharing something about yourself, sharing something about your ideas, engaging in conversation on a certain topic. Anything else that people might think about in terms of, my goal is to say something in a communication situation. I'll keep going, but people should keep thinking about that. So the next possibility is, do you want to learn something, right? And what would those things that you want to learn be? So we've, because we're academics, we talked about kind of being at academic conferences, right? I want to discover something new. Maybe I want to discover something to be able to apply it to a different situation, right? So what are some things that we might want to be learning in any networking situation? And then stop and think for a second, what do those have in common? Saying something and learning something, right? What do those have in common? And Janelle's chat, entry in the chat, just comment in the chat kind of gives us a hint. What is saying something, sharing, engaging in conversation, and learning something maybe have in common? Any ideas? You're thinking it in your head, I hope. It's clearly that both of them really involve listening, right? And you've heard this a lot of times, probably, that that really communication depends a lot on listening. Yeah, active listening, being engaged, engaging in conversation. We can't engage in conversation if it's all one-sided, right? That's a monologue. And we know from, I'm dating myself if I say The Incredibles, but we know from The Incredibles that if someone catches us monologuing, that's a bad thing. So let's talk a little bit about listening and a little bit more about active listening. Somebody already pulled up that phrase, right? So what is active listening? What do we mean by that? It's a way for us to describe that we're demonstrating interest, that we're really kind of creating opportunities for engagement, not just that we want to be heard, but that we're really open to engagement. And it also kind of makes the communication as much about the speaker, assuming you're not the speaker, as it is about you, right? So that's part of what we're doing, right? And kind of, I'll pick on E's example before about engaging with the scholar, like, I love your work. Okay, that opens things up, but then where's the next step was part of that problem, right? Where's the next part? So it was about them, but what about them, right? And so there's ways to kind of build on that active listening. So what are some ways that we can really make sure that we're engaging in active listening? You probably, again, have ideas of your own, and feel free to put them in the chat. We can think about things like giving the conversation your full attention. We are full of distraction right now in the world in so many ways, right? But certainly giving a conversation your full attention, stopping other activities, not pulling out your phone as soon as things get uncomfortable. Lots of us tend to do that. And I used a first person plural pronoun purposely, right? We often have that tendency, right? But give the conversation really your full attention. Avoid distractions, not other activities. Really paying attention to what the speaker is saying, and so part of that attention can be things like engaging, asking for clarification, right? Oh, are you talking about this situation? Can I just clarify that you meant this, right? That is a kind of, instead of, it might sound like, oh, like you weren't paying attention if you had to ask for clarification, but in fact, often it's most of the time, it's the exact opposite, right? By saying, I just want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, that you're talking about this, right? Is a way to clarify and to then demonstrate that we are engaged. Similarly, summarizing what speakers are saying, that's a tactic you hear in all sorts of active conversation. It's certainly pretty common in teaching, right? That you say back to students, okay, so I think what you're saying is this. How do we move on from that idea to a next idea? And it works just the same way in networking situations as well. And then also paying attention not just to the words, but also to the feelings behind the words, right? That someone's not just talking, probably not just talking in a monotone, but they are excited about something, or they start to be hesitant about something, right? And maybe even being able to think about and comment on that. Okay, well, I see you're really excited by that idea. I would love to hear more, because clearly that's something you're really passionate about. Or, I see you're kind of hesitating about that. Can you tell me more about that hesitation? Right? That those are ways, again, to demonstrate that you're engaged actively. And then again, asking questions that demonstrate that you're really paying attention in all those ways. So I'm going to pause for a second and again ask people to maybe make some suggestions. What are some other phrases that suggest active listening? Feel free to, again, turn on your, unmute yourself or just put something in the chat. Avoiding jumping ahead. Yeah, that's a good, yeah. Avoid, avoid, avoid jumping ahead of yourself when listening. Sometimes it distracts. Yeah, that's a great question, Raphael. Maybe it's if I understand your question correctly, it's how do you make sure that you're not but next we could talk about this, right? I think again it's that like slowing down. I think if you recognize that that's something you do, then it's just kind of slowing it down and maybe again repeating things. So I see some of those suggestions. Yeah, gestures like nodding, absolutely. Things like just to clarify, perfect. Repeating back the last couple of words. And then that often invites people to expand. That's a great point, Danielle. Body language, absolutely. Yep. Yes, I understand. Eye contact. Yeah, those are all great. Fantastic. Adding on to what they say, avoid jumping to conclusions. Yeah, exactly. Before they finish. Yeah, and that's kind of a that whole like interrupting, right? I'm glad, Rafael, you brought that up. There's some interesting things to think about there, right? We want to let people finish, but at the same time, engaging in conversation often is jumping in, right? And how do we figure out how to jump in? And there's no, I think, simple way to be, there's no like constant right and constant wrong about this, but being aware that we do that, I'm aware that I do that often when I talk to my kids and my family, actually even some degree with my team. And I have to really call myself on. I'm like, wait, sorry, I interrupted you, right? So even just recognizing that we do it, and that it can really demonstrate that we're really engaged and we really want to be engaged, but at the same time that we want to be respectful. So if it's something you tend to do, just kind of recognizing that you do it. Great, fantastic. You had some great ideas. And the other thing that we can think about in terms of active listening that some of you already anticipated, of course, is that a huge percentage of communication is not verbal, right? Body language communicates so much. So many of you already said eye contact, nodding, kind of those nonverbal acknowledgments, nodding your head, making eye contact, smiling, right? And even your posture, right? Like leaning in. And not only leaning in, right? There's also that, you've all had that moment of like, yes, we're leaning in to really think about something, but then also the like sitting back and thinking like, oh, wow, that really makes me think about, right? So all of those possibilities and learning how you're using them and how others are what the impact of others doing them is on your attention, on their communication, and really being keyed into those. So maybe that's another way to really think about not jumping in before people finish speaking, is really being attentive to more of that nonverbal communication. Mirroring, yeah, that's a great point, Danielle, right? If they're nodding, you're nodding, right? If they're smiling, it's often hard not to smile along with people. So just to kind of wrap this part up before you do a little scenario, right? If we think about effective communication involves some kind of planning, as well as the actions during, and then we also want to think about the after part too, right? That we want to learn from our actions. So beforehand, right? Again, remembering preparation is key. What are your expectations and your goals? Do you want to be listening? Do you want to be learning something? Is there something about you that you really want to make sure you communicate? Then planning for that, right? Writing down things you really want to be sure to communicate. I do a lot of work with students doing academic job interviews, and I always tell them, like, what are the 3 things you want to make sure people walk away with after they've interviewed you? Put them down, like, and very specifically, not just I'm a good scholar, I'm good at my field, I'm going to be done with my dissertation soon, but like really, what are those things? And forcing yourself to articulate them in writing then is one way to make sure that you know how you want to say them. And a good step into of that planning, right? And then practice, right? Practice and prepare, and wherever that is, right? You're in the car. I talk to myself a lot in the car, right? This is I'm going to say this phrase, or maybe that phrase, no, maybe not that one, right? So all sorts of opportunities. Thinking about questions, right? When we talk out loud, that makes our brains think about conversational situations. I help graduate students think about this all the time. Like, yes, you could explain in writing what your dissertation is about, but forced to say it to me, someone who's probably not in your field, really makes you recognize how to say it in a different way, how to say it in a more kind of colloquial way, how to say it so that you make sure it's engaging with people. So practice, just even talking out loud to yourself, you hear some of that. There's good science behind why this works. And then questions occur to you, and practice those questions. And then again, during the situation, right, make sure you're doing some active listening and really try to be in the moment. Again, like not worrying about, oh, how am I going to react or what's happening next, but really being in that moment. It's a tough skill for all of us with all the distractions of the world. And then afterwards too, really thinking a little bit about taking some time to reflect about what went well, what you want to maybe do differently, but remembering to give yourself some pats on the back about what really went well and saying, okay, well, this really went well and I was really proud of the way I did this. Next time, I think I'd also want to be doing that. And then also thinking about following up with some kind of written communication, right, as another, as the next step for networking, right, that you're going to follow up, gives you a chance to reiterate things, to engage in that conversation in a slightly different way, again, in writing, kind of be reminded of people. And that's, of course, an important way to build networks too. So I said we're going to do a little bit of scenario. We're going to try this out. I'm thoughtful of time, so I'm not going to, maybe won't, we'll just ask people to think about these a little bit. So we have some scenarios that we've kind of, or one scenario that we've kind of stopped step by step, and just kind of think about how you might suggest things. So here's our scenario. Alex, a graduate student, attending a professional conference for the first time. During a coffee break, Alex notices that there's attendees over there discussing a topic that's really closely related to Alex's own research. And so Alex would like to approach. And I want you to just take a second and think about what are some ways that Alex could, because that's a really tough situation. Like, I'm going to walk up to strangers and jump into this conversation. Any suggestions about how Alex might be able to do that? No right and wrong answers. Well, there's probably a really wrong one, but yeah, great, Danielle. I noticed you're discussing this. I'm really interested in the topic. Maybe saying, excuse me, right? Oh, excuse me, I'm going to jump in here, right? Approach the group, but actively listening, right? And there's a moment there, right? Because I've certainly been in that, like, oh, I want to be in on that conversation, but I don't want to feel like I'm lurking, right? So yeah, actively listen for a while, right? Say hello, assuming you're at the same place, or if it's not clear that you're at the same place. Oh, like I see you are at this conference. Great. Introduce himself, apologize for interrupting. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Great. Wonderful. All right, we're going to do the next part of the Alex scenario here. So Alex finally works up the courage to approach. This is a slightly different approach, a keynote speaker after the keynote. So same conference, same Alex, slightly different scenario. Alex walks up to the keynote speaker, introduces themselves, and then kind of nervously starts talking a lot about the minutia of their own interest, which overlaps with the keynote speakers, but really gets technical really quickly. What's going on with Alex's approach? What do you think? Is there anything you'd suggest about what Alex might do next? This one's a little different. Okay, slow down, right? Definitely, right? Slow down. Start by giving some explanation, right? About right, first, not because Alex really seems to be forgetting the like engaging another person, right? And is just doing that information dump, right? So Alex should have just taken a minute, maybe asked questions instead of talking about themselves, or maybe really just kind of just gone on for a minute, right? Instead of too much, right? So yeah, great. Excellent. Okay, so one last one, third part here. So Alex, we're gonna keep Alex in this uncomfortable situation they've put themselves in, right? The speaker, Alex is going on and on. The speaker tries to respond, but Alex interrupts with still more details. And after they've walked away from that, Alex leaves without exchanging any kind of information, and assuming that others are going to connect later through happenstance. So what would you suggest that Alex do during or after the conference instead? How might this really kind of less than perfect interaction? And I think this scenario we can apply either to the group or to the keynote speaker that Alex talked to for too long. So Alex, less is more. Okay, reach out and follow up on topics. Yeah. Right. So I think definitely one of the things that we could say here is that a negative, a perhaps not ideal situation doesn't mean that Alex can't follow up, right? And Alex didn't collect any kind of way to connect, but probably the conference does have some way of knowing who else was there, right? And they could write and follow up with an email, right? Ask to connect on LinkedIn. Great. Maybe even if it was someone they did have a great conversation with, or they thought they did, right? To follow up and say, I really think maybe I manipulate, I kind of talked a little too much about my own work, but I also want to be sure that I talked about yours, right? That I was really interested in specifics about their work. So a bad, getting off on the wrong foot doesn't necessarily have to be the whole part of the story. Yeah, excellent. Great. You had some fantastic ideas. Thanks so much. So I think I am going to turn this over to, oh, wait, I guess we did have some reflections. Yeah, I think you guys have done these, right? Immediate reaction if someone says something disparaging. How would you feel in the moment? I think we did a lot of these actually. So in the interest of time, I think we're going to jump to E's part.
Thank you, Linda. And so we've had some practice we've heard about from kind of the how do you manage your kind of anxiety and introversion in different scenarios, and really from a communication perspective, like how can you set some goals around like how you want to engage in networking. And then I'm gonna try to wrap the session up by talking about, we all know again like the importance of being connected and how important networking it is for all of us in our career growth and career development. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of these different aspects. So for those of you who have already heard about the benefits of networking, right? Oftentimes talking to someone can open up like new ways of thinking about opportunities within your field. And for those of us who may be working in the field for a while and we're exploring new things and maybe pivoting into a new area or trying to discover, oh, somebody with my background, if I wanted to move to a different area, what can I do? So oftentimes it gives you new ideas about what you can continue to pursue, whether it's in your field or pivoting to a different area. And then outside of kind of just gaining leads about like career exploration, oftentimes when we are talking to other people, it also allows us to gain meaningful experience in social occasions, right? Sometimes like Linda's kind of example earlier in her story, talking to someone and bonding over just being at a conference and talking about something that you mutually enjoy is actually a great way to make friends. In fact, there is a lot of articles coming out now talking about how important it is to have like a friend at work, and then it really kind of helps us feel more engaged at work and also feel supported and have more kind of job satisfaction when we're at workplace. And of course, more tangibly, a lot of your connections can also lead to job related opportunities. Maybe they know internally that they will have a position that will be posted soon, and then they can share a little bit more in addition to what you may have read from a job description or the company or organization mission, but what exactly that team is looking for in terms of expertise or what kind of background that they think is going to be kind of the best for that candidate moving forward, right? And then lastly, for a lot of you on this call, you might also be thinking about, oh, networking can be challenging, but if you think about it a different way, right? When you are invited to join a job interview, whether that's virtually or maybe later when you're meeting with your potential colleagues in person, it is actually a way of networking, right? Being on the interview is essentially meeting strangers and making a good impression and trying to figure out if mutually that you enjoy the work that you are talking about and if you can be a good fit for them. And then they also in turn will like you to be a great addition to their team. So there are a lot of like common networking scenarios and we kind of have given some examples throughout the presentation, but just want to quickly kind of talk about these different ways, and some of them are maybe you have been exposed to, and then some of the others maybe you have seen them but may not know exactly what they are, right? Oftentimes, if you're going to professional conferences and things like that, there are set happy hours for people to mingle and social, and oftentimes there's not really kind of any topic attached to it. So it's better to kind of go in and again, thinking about what your communication goals and purposes are. Increasingly, because I think we can acknowledge and networking in general is uncomfortable for people, and more organizations are actually trying to utilize speed networking to try to make it this more manageable, right? Having like 5-minute conversation with someone and you keep rotating, so you don't feel like you're stuck talking with someone or you don't have the opportunity to breaking into any conversations. And the networking meetups sometimes serve as similar functions. And of course, here you are at a workshop trying to learn more about networking. And oftentimes, if you're in the company or in the university setting, people do a lot of panels, again, to bring kind of interesting topics. So if you're attending those sessions, oftentimes there are already built-in topics for you to, like there are mutual interests for another person to be at this event, right? If you're then invited to visit some places, again, there are reasons why you want to be there. So that can be a great conversation starter. We kind of already give a lot of academic professional conference examples throughout our presentation. And then lastly, probably what's most high stake for a lot of you, and some of you are students, right, is attending career fairs. There's a lot networking that's happening there, and your goal is mostly to engage with employers and trying to see if what you have been trained in terms of your academic background can fit into their hiring needs. And of course, one of the things I want to really highlight is like all these event kind of type things, they seem like they're very, very crowd-based, right? And for those of us who feel more comfortable in talking to people, either one-on-one or in smaller situations, scheduling informational interviews. Basically, these are just conversations that you can schedule with anyone to discuss about their career path or learn a bit more about what they do in their day-to-day job. So if you happen to gather their contact information, you could always leverage social media platforms or emails and then try to set it up so that you are in a situation that better suits your needs and then how you like to be communicating with other people. And then one of the things I also want to talk about is, we talked about networking is kind of like a muscle you need to develop, right? And increasingly, some of you may also have heard about this term skill-based hiring, right? So a lot of times when employers are hiring people, they're looking for very specific attributes. So some people use the term transferable skills to highlight these different aspects. So things such as interpersonal skills, leadership skills, and the ability to take initiatives. You probably have seen these. I can't recall seeing a single job ad that doesn't talk about interpersonal skills, right? So a lot of things that we kind of already talked about, including being able to communicate yourself effectively, and the strategies of active listening, building rapport, and also being open and vulnerable with other people can set you up to be a great leader in the future, right? So having that self-awareness of what works for you and what works for other people, being able to manage team dynamics and group dynamics. And sometimes, as introverted people, we really spend a lot of time observing the room. So the ability, sometimes people use this phrase, to read a room, actually is a great leadership trait. And then lastly, putting yourself out there in any kind of new environment or online environment can be, can feel like you're taking a risk. So it is actually courageous for you to reach out and follow up. And it is effort. And then we want to acknowledge that. And then so that, engaging self-care that feels the most authentic to you is critical as well. And then these skills over time are really related to any job that you will have. Here we're talking about networking. Potentially, maybe you're thinking about going into a new job or interviewing, right? But once you're in the job, networking is really important for all of us, because we will continue to meet people even in the new job, right? Once you're in, a lot of times people will set you up for like one-on-one meetings with key stakeholders or partners, or have you to go on a listening tour. And a lot of these conversations feel like very similarly to one-on-one or like in a group kind of networking conversation. So a lot of the meaningful collaborations that you will do in any kind of job actually will emerge from these initial conversations. And once you find kind of common ground on things what you want to work on, you can continue to kind of build on that, that initial engagement and then go from there. So I think we're kind of at the time. We have a couple minutes left. And then throughout this presentation, we've given you some strategies and things to think about. But we also really want to re-emphasize on kind of the building up your confidence slowly, right? Like we mentioned, depending on different kinds of scenarios of networking, sometimes you can choose what you feel like is more approachable to you, or low risk conversations at this point, right? Maybe instead of scheduling a 1-hour conversation, try to schedule a 10-minute conversation. Instead of trying to approach a stranger or cold emailing someone, try to practice with someone you trust, or a member or a mentor that you know, or some people who seem friendly. A lot of you may be on LinkedIn, but actually Terrapins Connect, for those of you who are UMD alumni, may be a better platform, because people who are on this platform already have pledged to help with another TERP, right? And then leverage some of the structured programs and events, such as mentoring program can be great, just because you know what can you expect to alleviate some of that anxiety. And a big part of this is also to try to manage your own expectations. And in a world full of distractions, a lot of people don't respond, not because that they don't think that this is important, but sometimes people read it on their phone and then have moved on and forget to respond, right? So don't take it personally if your initial outreach was not reciprocated. And then really focus on quality over quantity. Focus on the people who actually spend the time to respond to your request, and then choose to engage in the ways that feel, authentic to you, whether it's one-on-one. And then another way that's really great to talk to kind of meet new people or network actually is to volunteer. A lot of you have a lot of talent and strength, right? Instead of maybe putting yourself in a happy hour situation, try to volunteer on a committee or in a different program. So you already are passionate about something, and then you can easily talk about the things that you enjoy with other people also who share that similarity with you. So we're going a little over time, but we are happy to stay over for a little bit for questions. But for those of you who maybe are gonna head out, we want to give you a prompt for you to write down some of the things maybe that'll help you in your next networking conversation, right? The first is, what is one thing you want to be sure to communicate about yourself? And the second thing is, what is a go-to question you can use to start conversations? So with that, we're gonna wrap up the conversation and also happy to answer any questions you might have.
Oh, is my audio working?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't able to attend the first part, so I missed part of it, but the rest was very informative. I don't know, is there a way you could email the recording, or I could email you for questions or
Yeah. So the Alumni Association will collect all the programs after this week's events are over. So I think as registered participants, you will get some kind of like resource sheet and a link to the recordings.
okay. Okay, thank you. What's your email? I think I might have a few questions.
Sure. It's just my full name at umd.edu.
Okay. Okay. I'll keep in touch. I have a few questions. Thank you very much. It was a very informative presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Cool.
I'm gonna stop sharing and also stop the recording. Has it already been stopped? Stopped?
It's still recording.
Oh, okay. I lost that.
Here, I can do it.